If I meet somebody and I talk to them about 9/11, how do I introduce them to the whole 9/11 truth story in a way that is going to be persuasive and that's going to get them to let down their guard and listen and start to consider what there is to be considered?
Well, it's hard to give a general answer because, as I've written, there are different kinds of people with different kinds of minds. And some people are what you would call paradigmatic thinkers. They've got a paradigm of the way the world works. Of course, that can be a natural philosophy, or in this case, the political world, how it works. And they'll give a priori objections such as, well, you know, our government simply wouldn't do such a thing. I know that. And or if they had done it, somebody would have talked. So sometimes you have to begin with showing them that their a priori assumptions aren't necessarily true. Other people are wishful and fearful thinkers, and they just say, you know, one person said to me, you know, I wouldn't believe what you were saying even if it were true. Or another person said, I simply refuse to believe what you say because I don't want to live in a country where our leaders would do such a thing.
It is a horrible thing to even contemplate.
It is. And then you've got some people, unfortunately a rather small percentage of the people, who are what I would call empirical or data-led minds, and they simply say, look, show me the evidence. And those are the ones that at least I'm the best with, because that's what I focus on is evidence. I do deal with those other questions. But I really think, and I'm more that way, and so I tend to speak to other people who are more that way. And so if you've looked at any of my books, you see they're just full of evidence that the official story can't be true. I even titled one of my DVDs, 9/11, Let's Get Empirical, rather than, you know, avoiding the empirical evidence, as a lot of the people who interview me want to do, by just firing a whole bunch of, well, why would they do that? Why would they do that? Why would they do that kind of questions? And I just say, well, I don't know why they would do that. You would have to ask them, but what I can show you is that no matter what you're talking about the World Trade Center collapses, you're talking about the non-interceptions, you're talking about the very idea of hijackers on the planes, I can show you the evidence. You know, if you're patient and you have what some of us call at least a 30% open mind, I can show you that there's no good evidence for what you say, for what the official story says, and even a lot of very strong evidence against it.
I'm talking with Dr. David Ray Griffin, who's written 7 books on 9/11. The most recent one is The New Pearl Harbor Revisited, 9/11, the cover-up and the expose. What's the cover-up?
Well, the main document for the cover-up, the first main document, was the 9/11 Commission report. And so my first book was The New Pearl Harbor, in which I simply laid out, you know, I was a Johnny-come-lately to the movement. It was a year and a half before I got involved, and at that stage a lot of work had already been done. And I simply summarized all the evidence that previous researchers had come up with. And then a few months later, the 9/11 Commission report came out, and I went over to the store and bought it immediately and sat down to read it to see how did they deal with all the things that we had talked about. And I knew, by the way, that they had my book from various ways. Means we knew they had multiple copies of my book. So it wasn't that they didn't know. It was how were they going to deal with this? And I saw they dealt with it by simply ignoring 99% of it, and the other 1% approximately distorted it. And so it was, you know, it's cover up all the way.
How about since then?
Well, then the next major report, see, that was 2004. Then 2005, NIST put out its report on the Twin Towers, and that's the part that the 9/11 Commission didn't really deal with. And you can know, not only did they not put it in the report, they didn't discuss it in any of their meetings, because Lee Hamilton, who was the co-chair, knew absolutely nothing about what the official theory of the collapse of the buildings was. He even said on an interview with CBC, the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, that he said, well, the towers came down because the fire melted the steel. Well, that's just absurd, of course. The fire can't get anywhere close to the temperature needed to melt steel. I mean, fire in an open situation like that, an ordinary hydrocarbon fire, whether it's jet fuel.
Well, wait, we're taking it, what I really want to do, because it's so easy to get into the details of this, because we've got listeners all over the world and in South Jersey and in Philadelphia who may not know much about this. Can you kind of give a brief overview of some of the main pieces of, some of the main conclusions that the 9/11 Truth Movement have come to regarding the deceptions and the cover-up, and what are the theories that are contemporary to the 9/11 Truth Movement? How do they diverge from what was reported and the story that the government has sold?
Okay, I'll give you a brief outline, and then you can come back and ask for detail on these.
Okay.
One big point, of course, is the question, why weren't the planes intercepted? Well, here we've had different stories. So originally they said that the military was notified by the FAA. You know, we have these standard operating procedures. If a plane has what they call an in-flight emergency, which is signaled by they lose radio contact, the transponder goes off, and the most decisive thing, if the plane radically changes course and doesn't get right back on, then the FAA notifies the military. The military scramble a plane, send it up a couple jets up very quickly. And normally these interceptions occur within 10 minutes. And that day, no interceptions occurred. And even though 20, 30 minutes, 40 minutes went by. So they said, well, the FAA was slow notifying us. And that's where the early 9/11 Truth Movement did the math and said, look, even if the FAA was this late, you still could have got there in time. These F-15s and F-16s go very fast, and the scrambling routine is very well rehearsed. And so when the 9/11 Commission came out, they just changed the story and said, yeah, that's right. If the military had told the truth, the interceptions could have been made. But the military lied, and actually the FAA didn't notify the military except for the very first flight, didn't give them time, and then didn't notify them about the other 3 flights at all. So that's one thing. And of course that contradicts what the military had said, what contradicts what hundreds of stories in the press had said. A second big area is the question, why did the buildings come down? And there you have to distinguish between the towers and Building 7. The towers were hit by these airplanes, and the claim is that the combination of the impact of the plane plus the fire that ensued plus gravitation brought the buildings down. And
very neatly in pancake form, right?
Yeah, that was the original term, pancake. NIST didn't use that in its later report, but the idea was, yes, it did come. There was an enormous explosion at the top of each tower, which, and here's something that theory can't handle, sent huge steel beams, sections of steel beams that weighed an enormous amount, sent them out horizontally 500, 600 feet and plastered them on neighboring buildings. You can see this, say, in Loose Change Final Cut or 9/11 Mysteries. So that was the theory.
What was that second video called?
9/11 Mysteries.
9/11 Mysteries.
Yeah. And so there you have a problem, because these buildings come straight. In other words, they come down in a way that is fully explainable if explosives of some sort, very powerful explosives, were put in the building, and yet they want to claim that it was just gravity that brought the buildings down, gravity and fire and a little bit of impact damage that brought the buildings down. And just from a scientific point of view, it is simply absurd. And I go into this at great length in the new Pearl Harbor Revisited and show how the physicists, the architects, and the engineers all say that that's it's just absurd. You're violating many of Newton's. I mean, we're talking about high school physics here, basic laws like the law of the conservation of momentum. So that's another big area. Then World Trade Center 7, which came down at late in the afternoon, which for several years they tried to keep a secret. The 9/11 Commission didn't even mention that Building 7 came down. Here we got a 47-story building, wasn't hit by a plane, had rather minor fires in it in the afternoon, and then all of a sudden comes down at virtually free fall speed, under 7 seconds, and really a classic implosion where the building just folds in on itself. So anybody looking at it who's an expert or even a semi-expert, say like Dan Rather on CBS, looks at it and says, well, you know, that's an implosion. Looks just like a classic implosion. And now NIST just came out this last week with a report, and it will be totally savaged. It already has been informally, but pretty soon, because they knew there was no way to explain how you could how fire could have brought down a building in a way that would duplicate controlled demolition. So that's another big area. Another big area is the Pentagon. Of course, the official story is that Flight 77 doubled back, and that's where we're talking 30, 40 minutes and no interceptions. The claim is, well, we just didn't know. And, you know, we got the best, the military has the best radar system in the world, and the idea that after 2 buildings had already been struck, that a plane could sneak back to Washington and hit the Pentagon, the most well-defended building in the world, is ludicrous on its face. But then when you look at the details, there is simply no evidence that a large airliner, whether a Boeing 757, which is what Flight 77 was, or anything else crashed there. And I've reported in the new book a lot of new testimonies from people inside the Pentagon who came right to the place where the plane supposedly hit, and they look and say, now, well, where is the plane? You know, we ought to see a tail, we ought to see a fuselage, we certainly should see some of these steel engines. There is no sign of an airliner here. Jamie McIntyre said, you know, there's nothing but what you can pick up in your hand, just small little pieces of something. So that's another big area. And then the final one, where I've just posted an article, was America attacked by Muslims on 9/11.
Yeah, we've got that on opednews.com, and for the last day, it's the top story.
Yeah, it's been getting, I'm pleased to see, it's been getting good reviews. And I give a number of the arguments that the government had marshaled to try to convince us that there were Muslim hijackers on the planes. And every one of them, when you look at it, it falls apart, and you find that they all seem to have been fabricated. So the biggies are, well, we know there were Muslims on the plane because people made all these phone calls, the most famous of which were cell phone calls, telling their relatives or telling ground crew that the planes had been hijacked by these Middle Eastern men, and one flight attendant even said,
you know what it just reminded me of?
Yeah.
The Boston Tea Party. You know, the Boston Tea Party, all these Bostoners dressed up as Indians.
That's right. So it's a classical false flag operation where there's somebody you want to go to war with, so you dress up like them, or you run up their flag and you attack yourself and then claim you were attacked. The Japanese did this to start the Pacific part of World War II. The Germans did it when they wanted to attack Poland. we've done it several times, like with the Mexican War and so on. In this case, all the elaborate stories to tell us there were Muslim hijackers on the plane. So the phone calls fall apart, and the most famous of the phone calls was the one from Barbara Olson. And this was one that was supposed to prove that Flight 77 was still in the air, because there was a rumor that an airliner had crashed in the Midwest. And then Ted Olson, who was the Solicitor General for the Department of Justice, said that his wife, Barbara Olson, the well-known TV commentator on CNN, had called him twice that morning and said the plane, Flight 77, had been hijacked, and the hijackers had put them all in the back of the plane and so on. Well, FBI reported that, and now in 2006, when they put out a report for the Moussaoui trial, the so-called 20th hijacker, the report says Barbara Olson did attempt to call, but it didn't go through, and it was unconnected, and therefore lasted 0 seconds. So here we've got something really astounding that should have been screaming headlines. FBI, which is part of the Department of Justice, FBI says, story told by former Solicitor General Ted Olson is not true.
Now, was he a member of the Project for a New American Century?
He was not a member as such, but he was certainly in the same ideological realm of the neocon philosophy.
The neocon philosophy being we need a Pearl Harbor so we can engage in a new level of imperialism, taking and using our military power to expand American hegemony.
Yeah, by the neocon philosophy, I meant this idea that now meaning 2000 and 2001 or the late 90s, now that we are the sole remaining superpower, that's what they were saying, we should take advantage of this enormous military power we have, of superiority, to really create a Pax Americana, which of course is a polite term for an empire of totally global scope. So these guys were very ambitious, and certainly these neocons who belong to the Project for the New American Century did all sign off on this statement, Rebuilding America's Defenses, that it would be very helpful if there were a new Pearl Harbor. It would speed this process of transformation up.
I'm talking to Dr. David Ray Griffin, who is one of the preeminent experts on 9/11 truth. This is Rob Kall, and it's the Rob Kall Show on WNJC 1360. And we're going to keep talking about this. Now, all of these things, all of these deceptions, all of these distortions and cover-ups, they really lead us to some pretty horrible conclusions, don't they? What are some of those conclusions that are about who really caused this? What were the intentions? What are some of the assumptions that have been generated?
Okay, with this kind of question, who is really behind it? Again, I don't focus on this. I focus on the fact that the official story is false. But that said, there would be two levels of questioning. One would be who was ultimately behind it, and you've got various theories on that. And I think probably one of those theories is true. But down at the operational level, you can raise this question: who was in charge of the operation that day? And there, it's very clear that all roads lead to Dick Cheney, primarily. But then, of course, you've got Don Rumsfeld, his very good friend of how many decades, and then General Myers in the Pentagon. So, but let's focus on Rumsfeld and Cheney, who both were full-fledged neocons. The reason I focus on Cheney is because the 9/11 Commission and the government in general has gone to great lengths to try to cover up the truth about where Cheney was that morning. Norman Mineta, who was Secretary of Transportation, when he was talking to the 9/11 Commission in open testimony, so this is on, you can watch this on YouTube, he said that he went down to the underground bunker under the White House at 9:20, and Dick Cheney was already there, and Richard Clark had told him, go down there and join the vice president. So Richard Clark knew he was down there, and Mineta testified he was down there. And then he said, this young man come in the room and say, Mr. Vice President, that plane is now 50 miles out. Then he comes back in and says, Mr. Vice President, that plane is now 30 miles out. Then he comes back in, it's now 10 miles out. Do the orders still stand? And that Cheney whipped his head around and said, of course the orders still stand. Have you heard anything different? Well, that was just shortly before the Pentagon was struck. So what it sounded like was that Mineta inadvertently revealed that Cheney had confirmed a stand-down order. I mean, the stand-down means you don't follow normal procedures. Normal procedures, if anything were coming towards the Pentagon, which is absolutely forbidden zone, where commercial planes are never allowed, and certainly would not have been allowed on 9/11 after the towers had been hit, standard procedure would be to shoot it down. And so if he had confirmed then the order still stand, that would have been a confirmation of a stand-down order. Well, that hypothesis as to what that really was is confirmed then when you see what the 9/11 Commission does. It goes to enormous lengths to try to deny, cover up that story. It says, first of all, that Cheney didn't even get down to the underground bunker until almost 10 o'clock, perhaps 9:58. Well, this is 45 minutes later than everybody else said Cheney was down there. Even Cheney himself on Tim Russert's Meet the Press 5 days after 9/11 contradicted what became the official story, and everybody just says, oh, well, just ignores it. Secondly, besides telling that 45-minute lie, they deleted Mineta's testimony from the 9/11 Commission report, so you don't see a mention of that whatsoever. Furthermore, from the audio-video recording of it in the files of the 9/11 Commission, that part of Mineta's testimony is deleted. So you start to see this is a big deal. Furthermore, they even invent a new story, and where the guy comes in and asks time and time again, should we do this? Should we do this? And Cheney then says yes. But that occurs at about 10:15, long after everything has happened. Long after the Pentagon's been hit, long after Flight 93 has crashed, and then the question is, was it shot down? And it appears to be. So they go to enormous lengths there to cover up Cheney's role. Furthermore, in the new book, reveal for the first time that there was a guy at Los Angeles International Airport that morning who had been involved with security at LAX, putting in systems, and he knew the security people there very well. And he went back there that morning, and he was there with LAX security when he said he heard them on their walkie-talkies, and sometimes he could hear both sides of the conversation, saying that first of all they heard the planes didn't intercept these things because the FAA didn't notify them. But then they heard, well, no, the FAA did notify them, but they didn't intercept them because there had been a stand-down order. Then the question was, well, where did the stand-down order come from? And the answer was from the highest level of the White House. So
you've kind of made it clear that you haven't come up with or posited or taken a position on any theories about what were the deeper underlying reasons that this happened. But you know what they are. Can you talk about them? And just in terms of reporting to us what some of those theories are that have been generated, or are you not comfortable with that?
Oh, well, no, I can certainly talk about the motives for 9/11, and I talk about those in my book. The most immediate ones was, of course, to have an excuse to attack Afghanistan. That war had been decided upon at least by July of 2001, and I had reported that already in New Pearl Harbor. Secondly, these neocons, and particularly Cheney and Wolfowitz and Pearl and some others, had been chomping at the bit to attack Iraq ever since 1992. And were very upset with Papa Bush for not going all the way to Baghdad. And they'd been working on that all through the 90s, writing letters to Clinton and saying, ignore the UN, ignore international law, just attack Saddam. And you know, Clinton did some bad things, but he didn't do that. And so that was clearly a motive. And as you know, we've seen from the Secretary of the Treasury, Paul O'Neill, that he said that when he went into the first meetings of the National Security Council, as soon as the Bush-Cheney administration went into office, the main agenda, in fact, almost the only item on the agenda, was to attack Iraq, and not why, not what, but simply how to do it.
Okay, and, now another station ID. This is the Rob Kall Show, 1360 AM, WNJC, and I'm talking with Dr. David Ray Griffin, one of the world's preeminent experts on 9/11 truth. What really happened on 9/11? And what I'm hearing, Dr. Griffin, is that there were orders that allowed this to happen that probably came from Dick Cheney.
It seems most probable, yes.
And that the neocons in the Bush administration who wanted a war were looking for an excuse for one. And I know that back in the late 90s, the Project for a New American Century had written about the idea that what was needed was a Pearl Harbor type event that could be used as an excuse to start a new set of wars and combat situations.
Rob, could I add them? I'm sorry.
Sure. This is John Gold.
Yes, how you doing? Hi, Dr. Griffin.
Hi, John.
One of the things I wanted to talk about, you were saying the basic premise for the cover-up. And very quickly, with regards to motive, Ray McGovern once said his acronym for oil was O for oil, I for the protection of Israel, and L for the logistical placement of bases in that region for future use, which is basically everything that Dr. Griffin talked about with regards to the Pax Americana. One thing I wanted to talk about was the young man from Minetta's testimony. That young man was never named. That young man was never brought before the 9/11 Commission to testify, and yet this is one of the most important events of the 9/11 day. So that's an interesting aspect of that as well.
Well, yeah, it's just one of, over 100 examples of the fact that they didn't do any kind of real investigation.
Right. And you asked Rob for a basic premise of the cover-up. Going back to the joint congressional inquiry, there were 28 redacted pages that were omitted from that final report. With regards to the 9/11 Commission, they were mandated to give a full and complete accounting of the 9/11 attacks. So everything that they did not cover constitutes a cover-up. Now, that includes whistleblowers like Sibel Edmonds, who was the most gagged person in American history.
Well, John, I want to talk a little bit about whistleblowers for a second. Op-Ed News does a lot of coverage of whistleblowers, and we work with the National Whistleblowers Organization pretty closely. There's been reports reports recently, several of them, that basically the Bush administration has done everything they possibly could to squelch whistleblowers. Now, I thought that, eventually people would come out who worked in the administration and become whistleblowers and talk about what they'd seen and what they'd experienced. And it ends up there's a process that whistleblowers have to go through. Well, it also ends up that the Bush administration decided through the Justice Department and the judiciary system to basically silence whistleblowers. Sibel Edmonds is at the very tip of the iceberg. She's one of thousands of whistleblowers who have been silenced. Now, it's just starting to come out just how terrible this has been. Literally, thousands and thousands of whistleblowers have come forward, gone to the Justice Department, or brought lawsuits against corporations, and then the Bush administration has basically used technicalities or delay or to basically shut them down and shut them out. So literally just out of thousands, only a handful of them have moved forward. Only a handful out of thousands. This is criminal.
Absolutely. And with regards to the...
I believe that what should be done is that in the House and the Senate, the Judiciary Committee should be holding hearings on the failure, the intent, and the intentional blocking of whistleblower reports reaching the American public and the judicial system. We've got to do something about that. It's a major problem. I want to introduce you, John. John, it's become a kind of a custom on the show that very often when I don't feel I have the expertise, ignorance is sometimes helpful when you're asking questions of a guest, but it's great to also have somebody who knows a lot about it. And one of the wonderful things about Op-Ed News, with its close to 16,000 members, is that we've got an incredible wealth of resources of people who know an awful lot about a lot of different subjects. And John is one of our regular writers and commenters on 9/11 Truth, and so I invited him on as a co-host to join the discussion here. So it's John Gold. Go ahead, John.
Thank you very much. With regards to the 9/11 Commission and whistleblowers, the Jersey Girls, the four widows who fought for the creation of the commission, who started the 9/11 Family Steering Committee to monitor the commission, they brought forward whistleblowers to the 9/11 Commission for them to be heard. And according to Patty Casaza, Thomas Keene told her to her face that each and every whistleblower would be heard, and most were not. So there's a huge cover-up. I mean, there are a multitude of 9/11 whistleblowers, Robert Wright, I believe Sibel Edmonds, John M. Cole. There's a multitude of whistleblowers. So when they were charged with giving a full and complete accounting, obviously they failed miserably, and that constitutes a number of things. I mean, there were several war games that were taking place that day. Only one was mentioned in the 9/11 report. So there goes the full and complete accounting. The family members, since the release of the 9/11 report, former Representative Cynthia McKinney held 9/11 congressional hearings in Washington, D.C.
Maybe that's part of the reason she was so
absolutely
aggressively worked against in her most recent failed campaign. I mean, they did everything they could to throw her out. I think the other thing, of course, was her advocacy of a more even-handed approach in the Middle East.
Absolutely.
And the IPAC brand of supporting Israel.
While we're talking about whistleblowers, let me mention that one that I discussed quite a bit in the book is one who has come forward, except that just for the things you're saying, he's afraid to reveal his identity. He did reveal it to Stephen Jones, our leading physicist in the movement, so we do know he's who he says he was, and he was a former employee of NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, which put out these official reports on the World Trade Center. And he says that NIST had become totally politicized, that this started happening already in the Clinton administration, but then it got much worse with the Bush administration. And so that everything, is supposed to be made up of scientists, and they're supposed to be giving these objective reports, but they end up being political reports, propaganda reports, and particularly 9/11. He says everything they wrote had to go through 3 levels of approval. First of all, the Commerce Department, which they were part of. NIST is part of the Commerce Department. And then they had a special person from the White House assigned to them, and then the national NSA. And so that he said it is no longer a scientific organization at all, that there's still scientists there, and they're good scientists, but the work they do, they've become nothing more than hired guns.
I don't like what happened with the Justice Department, eh?
That's right. That again, there's just no bounds to politicizing things that are supposed to be somewhat objective and fair-minded. This administration, more than any previous administration, has politicized everything. The only thing that counts is whether you say what they want you to say. And so just on that a priori basis alone, people should be enormously suspicious of the NIST reports, and then that's confirmed when you look at what they actually say and see that these people, insofar as they're good scientists, they know that what they're saying is a lie. They know it's scientifically absurd, but it's their paycheck, and they put it out there.
Can I say something about the recent NIST report on WTC7? I was never a huge advocate of promoting controlled demolition, but when this report was released, they referred to it as an extraordinary event and a new phenomenon. Now,
didn't people laugh at that press conference?
Well, the thing is,
I saw on TV people laughing at this guy's report.
I didn't actually see all of it, but what stood out to me, if this was the only, quote, extraordinary event that took place on 9/11, then maybe I wouldn't look at it again. However, as Dr. Griffin can attest to, there were a multitude of, quote, extraordinary events that took place on 9/11. So when I saw that, it made me take a double take as to what NIST is telling us with regards to the towers and WTC7.
Yeah, when you look at the overall story, and still from the point of view of the mainstream press, what we're promoting is a ridiculous conspiracy theory. When you look at the official conspiracy theory, it is the most absurd conspiracy theory that's ever been invented. If somebody had written this for a movie, it would have been thrown out of the room and just say, that's just so absurd. Nobody would have ever believed such a thing. Let me go back to the evidence for the hijackers. One of the most absurd things is that they knew there were hijackers on the planes because under the World Trade Center towers, after they collapsed, they found a passport of one of the hijackers from Flight 11.
Throw down.
Pardon?
Throw down.
And that one clearly didn't pass the giggle test, so they just changed the story because some, reporters said, well, that's a little incredible. And so they just changed it and said, well, no, they actually found it before the North Tower collapsed. So here you have the scenario, all this, so you've got a hijacker in the plane. He's got his passport in his pocket or in his luggage or, and they hit the building and this enormous fireball erupts, and this passport floats out of his pocket or whatever and gets through the fireball without being singed. Then it gets out of the building and falls to the ground where somebody can find it.
Yet we have people like Bill Maher who mocks 9/11 truths, and we have people who just basically mock the people who are raising these issues. How do you deal with them?
You mean the majority of the mainstream media?
The mainstream media and authors of books who mock it. I was at a book event down in Washington a couple months ago with David Korn, and I can't think of the Matt Taibbi, is it Taibbi?
Yeah.
Book. So how do you deal with them?
Well, actually,
what's your response to them?
It's interesting you brought up Matt, because coincidentally I have just completed a long interview with him. He wanted this interview after he had written this article saying that 9/11 truthers were idiots, and he wrote to me and said he wanted to interview me, and I said, why would you want to interview an idiot? And he said, well, I don't think you're an idiot. I think you're an opportunist. And so that made me feel really good, so I was happy, I was happy to do the interview. And then he didn't like my answers at all, because frankly they made him look pretty silly, because he said a lot of really, really silly things, because he knows hardly anything about 9/11 except that it's wrong. And but to his credit, unlike most of the people on the left, he was willing to take me on and give me a chance to speak. And this is going to be coming out in alternate any day now. It should have been out by now, but the woman in charge made a big move and so on, so it got delayed. But you'll see there a response. And I had another one that just appeared by Sam Vaknin that appeared on some of the websites today. And now it wasn't from the left, but he raised the same kinds of questions. So it'll be interesting to see what, now that a couple people have given us a forum on rather standard sites, whether anybody else will, or they will say, well, let's not do that anymore. That didn't work out too well for our side.
Do you feel you made any progress with Matt?
Oh, no progress with Matt. I was aiming at the readers of Alternet, because this is the first time, to my knowledge, that they let anybody from the 9/11 Truth Movement on their site. Most of these sites won't even let us on. Counterpunch for a long time wouldn't allow any 9/11 Truth article on there. Finally, Paul Craig Roberts was writing about other things, and then snuck in some things about 9/11 Truth, and kind of broke the barrier there. But for the most part, they just won't even give us a forum. They just, it's all a one-sided conversation. You're a bunch of conspiracy nuts, but you're so stupid we're not even going to let you speak back.
Well, I'm glad to have you here and do another Station ID. This is Rob Kall, and it's the Rob Kall Show, 1360 AM, WNJC, and I'm speaking with Dr. David Ray Griffin, who is the author of a good number of books on 9/11 Truth, and we have from opednews.com one of our writers and diarists, John Gold, who's another expert on 9/11 Truth. Right before we started this conversation tonight, I sent you an email about some news that the Russians are holding some panel discussions on 9/11, and that they're challenging the truth. It's interesting. The other day, Putin suggested that the reason that there was that Bush and Cheney were reacting the way they did to the Russian Georgian invasion was as a way to help McCain win the presidential election. I wonder if the Russians are going to start talking about 9/11 Truth. I would imagine that with their espionage resources, they would have some information that's not generally available.
The interesting thing about Putin is, I believe, Dr. Griffin, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but in the days prior to 9/11, he actually sent a warning, did he not, with regards to something similar in 9/11?
I heard something about that, but I can't verify that. I don't know for sure what that was. But this conference is a very interesting thing because, several months ago I went over and this film by this Italian Giulietto Chiesa, who's a member of the European Parliament, and this was played in the European Parliament building, and he brought several of us together to have that discussion, including Fujita from Japan, the senator there who has spoken out. And now the Russians did it. Incidentally, I might have been there if I hadn't been on the road and didn't get the email in time, and I guess by the time I got the invitation, they already had filled their quota of people they could bring, so I didn't go. But they've got some very good people there, Chiesa himself, and then the guy that was the head of the Russian military, whom I quote in the new book. He's part of the conference, so you've got a Russian as well as an Italian and a Frenchman, Terry Mithon, speaking. And evidently this is going to be beamed out to Russian television. So Putin is allowing the Russian population to learn the truth about 9/11.
So gee, this is a real change of things. The rest of the world finds out the truth and gets the news better than we here in the U.S., depending upon the mainstream media. What a change!
By
the way, the links to this information on this conference are on Op-Ed News. If you go to the main page, you'll be able to find it there.
With regard to the media, it's not only us that they ignore. They also ignore the family members. On two separate occasions, the 9/11 family members have called for an entirely new investigation. Once on September 11, 2006 at the National Press Club in D.C., and again in February of 2008. And that request was made by the Jersey Girls, the women who fought for the creation of the original 9/11 Commission. And yet these newsworthy items are not being covered by our media.
That's right. They glorify the Jersey Girls, and weren't they great getting the 9/11 Commission going and all that. But now they will not mention them, that they've turned against the 9/11 Commission. And John, you know this better than I do, but early on, they didn't want to have much to do with us. They certainly didn't want to be seen with us in public. And because they were confident that the 9/11 Commission was really going to do a good job and get to the truth. They became disillusioned over time, and they became very disillusioned after the report came out, and now they are willing to support us. So my previous book, Lori Van Auken endorsed, and my new book, Monica Gabrielle, the sort of the fifth Jersey Girl, has endorsed. So they are, at least those two and some of the others are pretty much full-fledged 9/11 truthers now.
I think they were trying to avoid the stigma that the media uses of conspiracy theorists. If you remember, 9/11 family member Donna Marsh O'Connor said that she has become a victim of 9/11 conspiracy theories because it does, the media uses that phrase and shuts everyone up. They don't give you the time of day. They call you a name instead.
What I want to do now is I want to try to open the phones up and see if there's any callers who want to call in. We have a couple of phone lines that you can call in on, 856-232-7077 or 856-232-7078. I'll do that again, 856-232-7077 or 856-232-7078.
Rob, while you're waiting for a call, if I can just get a plug-in and explain the nature of my new book.
Absolutely.
It's called The New Pearl Harbor Revisited, and some people have thought it's just a revised version of The New Pearl Harbor. And no, it's a brand new book. Every word is new. But what it is, it's the idea now is that you read these two books together. The later one is a commentary on and presupposes the earlier one. And the idea is if you get those two books, you've got really, for the most part, most things you need to know in order to make an informed judgment about 9/11. And so see the best criticisms of the official story that have emerged from the 9/11 Truth movement, and particularly now in recent years when we've got this influx of scientists and pilots and architects and engineers, and it can no longer be caricatured as a bunch of kids, conspiracy kids on the internet. It's become very professionalized now.
Well, let's, I don't know if we're going to get any calls or not, but while we're waiting, if you wanted to get a short, simple message to people who don't know much about 9/11 Truth, what would you want them to know? What would be the elevator conversation that you'd have with them? You're going up from the ground floor to the 10th floor. What's the quick message?
Well, I would tell the Barbara Olson story. Here's the thing that really propelled us into the war on terror, and now the FBI tells us it wasn't true, so somebody was lying. Also, I would bring up Bush in the classroom. The Secret Service should have thought, when they saw the second tower hit, oh my God, it's terrorists attacking America, and that's what they said. Andy Card said he whispered in the president's ear, America's under attack. They're clearly going after high-value targets. We've got to get the president out of here. Everybody knows the president's going to be at the school this morning. They let him stay at the school for another half hour. So what did the White House do the next year? They changed the story and said that Andy Card whispered in his ear, and Bush sat there for about a second, got up and left the room. Now, that was before the Michael Moore movie came out, where everybody saw that Bush just sat there for 8 or 9 minutes. And yet the White House went on MSNBC and Charlie Gibson and on ABC and the story in the San Francisco Chronicle saying that Bush immediately got up and left the room, trying to cancel that early story.
Oh, I think we have a caller on.
We have John.
Hello.
Hi, John.
John? This is John.
What's your question?
John Vegas. I've been 9/11 truther since JFK was shot. Hey, Dr. David Ray Griffin, you're one of my biggest heroes, man. Keep it up. I've got 3 of your books. I had one thing I wanted to bring up today that's not talked a lot. And by the way, I'm like you 24/7. I'm looking at information on 9/11.
Where are you from, John?
What about this was in Michael Rupert's book about Jeb Bush, the governor, hours after the attacks, having a military C-130 Hercules transport fly to the Venice airport, hastily loaded a rental truck filled with the records of Huffman Aviation, and was driven directly into the plane. Have you found out much about that?
I can actually say something more about that.
No, but what you say is certainly true from all I know. The Bushes clearly were in the center of this. Marvin Bush, another brother, of course, was one of the principals in a company that was in charge of security for the World Trade Center. If anybody wants to know how could have domestic terrorists got inside the buildings to plant the explosives?
In May of this year at Keene, New Hampshire, the gentleman who originated that story, Daniel Hopsiker, I believe, gave an entire lecture and included that in his lecture. So there's a video available online to see of Daniel Hopsiker in Keene, New Hampshire.
Okay, I'm glad.
Yeah, Hopsiker did very good work, and I rely on him a lot in this forthcoming book, and particularly for all the stories about Mohammed Atta and how the FBI and the 9/11 Commission just told lie after lie after lie as to where Atta was and what he was doing.
Is this a bipartisan cover-up? I mean, we've had 2
Absolutely.
years of the 110th Congress. Do you think that the Democrats, especially if they come in January with more seats in the House and the Senate, do you think they're going to do anything to explore this further, open up investigations again at all? Are there any members of Congress currently who even talk about this, who you can have a conversation with without just being blown away?
Kucinich is the only one that I know of who has publicly, with any visibility, who has publicly said that he was interested in having an investigation. He has thus far not done anything about it. He's been working on the impeachment without bringing this into the picture. But to answer your question, my answer is if the Republicans stay in power, there will be zero chance of an investigation. If the Democrats get in control, there will be at least a 1% chance.
So two sides of the same coin.
On some issues, and certainly Bill Clinton knows standard operating procedures. You can't be president for 8 years without knowing how the military and the FAA interact and what is the capability of our defense.
We have another call.
Okay, we've got another call. And who's calling and where are you from?
Hi, my name is Joab, and I'm calling from Marietta, Georgia. I just want to say it's really a great privilege, and I consider it even an honor just to talk to you guys. Mr. Griffin, I've admired your work for several years now, and I think in my mind you're a true hero, and dare I say it, a man of God even, although I'm a spiritual person and not of any denomination. Rob, I've been actually a member. I've never contributed to op-ed yet, but I've been seeing enough lately, so maybe I don't have time to edit, but I will send you some of my stuff. And gentlemen, you're doing great work. So I sometimes despair, and yet sometimes I dare to hope that the truth will come out, although the powers that we are opposing are so monumentally strong and just incredibly dependent.
Joe, we got 1 minute left, and unfortunately we're going to have to thank you for your kudos, and we're going to have to kind of wrap up the show. Dr. Griffin, you have a website that you'd like to tell people about?
I don't, but I do like to mention 911truth.org, and they happen to be having a huge book sale now on 9/11 books. I believe everything is 25% off. So if you want any of my 7 or 8 books about 9/11, you can get them all there at 25% off.
All right, and we've hit the end of our hour. This is the Rob Kall Show at 1360 a.m. Come back next week at 9 o'clock. We're going to be talking about the stuff you don't find on the mainstream media. Thank you, Dr. Griffin. Thank you, John Gold. And good night.
Thank you, gentlemen.
You're listening to WNJC 1360 a.m. Up next is Radio Esperanto with Pastor Garcia. Hey, Rob, I sent you an email. I won't be here next week.